If your dog starts ignoring you in small moments, it rarely happens all at once. It shows up in subtle ways that are easy to overlook at first. You call them and they hesitate for just a second longer than usual. Or they notice you, but choose not to respond immediately the way they once did. Most people dismiss these moments because they don't feel important on their own. But dogs don't change behavior randomly, and even the smallest shift has a cause. These moments are not isolated, and they tend to repeat in similar situations. That repetition is where the meaning begins to form. Dogs are constantly observing patterns in how you behave. They track your timing, your tone, and how consistent your responses are. When those patterns feel clear, your dog responds quickly and confidently. When they feel less clear, your dog begins to hesitate and adjust. Ignoring you in small moments is often not defiance. It is a form of behavioral adjustment based on what your dog has learned to expect. That expectation is built slowly through repeated interaction. And once it changes, behavior follows without needing a dramatic event. At first, the change is almost invisible. Your dog still responds most of the time, and the relationship feels the same overall. But small delays begin to appear in specific situations. Those delays are the first sign that something is shifting underneath. Dogs do not need a major reason to change behavior. They respond to small inconsistencies just as much as obvious ones. A slight change in tone or timing can alter how they interpret a situation. And over time, those small changes begin to accumulate. When your dog hesitates before responding, they are not being slow. They are evaluating what they expect to happen next. That moment of evaluation is where the shift becomes visible. And it often appears before any obvious behavioral change. Instead of reacting immediately, your dog pauses. That pause creates distance between stimulus and response. And that distance changes how the interaction unfolds. Over time, those pauses become more consistent. What starts as hesitation can become selective response. Your dog begins to choose when to engage and when not to. This is not about disobedience, but about interpretation. They are responding based on what feels predictable to them. Predictability is one of the most important factors in dog behavior. When your actions feel consistent, your dog responds without hesitation. When they feel inconsistent, your dog begins to adjust. That adjustment is what you are seeing in these small moments. Not all ignoring looks the same. Sometimes it is a delayed response, and other times it is a complete lack of reaction. But the underlying pattern remains the same. Your dog is responding to how they interpret your behavior. Dogs rely on patterns more than anything else. They do not respond to single moments in isolation. They respond to what happens repeatedly over time. That is why consistency matters more than intensity. If your behavior changes slightly across situations, your dog notices. Even if you don't see it, they do. And those changes influence how they respond. Over time, those responses become patterns. Once a pattern forms, it becomes predictable. Your dog begins to repeat the same response in similar situations. That is when the behavior becomes noticeable. And that is when most people start to question what is happening. Ignoring you in small moments is not the beginning of disconnection. It is the result of a shift that has already been building. What you are seeing is the surface of something deeper. And that deeper layer is shaped by repeated interaction. At this stage, your dog is not rejecting you. They are adjusting how they engage with you. That adjustment reflects how they interpret your consistency. And that interpretation becomes their reference point. Your dog is constantly updating that reference point. Every interaction adds to their understanding. And that understanding shapes how they respond moving forward. Not consciously, but consistently. This is why small behaviors matter more than they seem. They are not random or meaningless. They are part of a larger system of communication. And once you recognize that system, the behavior becomes clearer. Most people wait for obvious signs before paying attention. But by then, the pattern is already established. The real insight comes from noticing the small changes early. Because those small changes reveal the direction things are moving. Over time, these moments of ignoring become easier to recognize. They follow similar triggers and appear in familiar situations. That predictability is what makes them meaningful. Because predictable behavior reflects learned patterns. Your dog is not ignoring you without a reason. They are responding to what they expect based on past experience. That expectation shapes how they behave in the present, and it continues to influence future interactions. Once you understand this, the behavior stops feeling confusing. It becomes something you can interpret and anticipate. And anticipation is what allows you to see patterns clearly. Because patterns are what drive behavior over time. Your dog is not choosing to ignore you randomly. They are responding to how consistent your behavior feels to them. And when that consistency shifts, even slightly, their behavior adjusts to match it. That adjustment is not dramatic, but it is consistent. And consistency is what gives behavior meaning. Because what repeats is what matters most. In the end, your dog is not simply ignoring you. They are communicating something through small changes in behavior. And those changes reflect how they understand you. Once you begin to see it this way, the behavior becomes easier to read. It is no longer confusing or random. It becomes part of a pattern you can recognize. And that recognition changes everything. Because it shifts your focus from single moments to consistent behavior. And that is where real understanding begins. Over time, this is where the behavior becomes easier to recognize and more predictable in nature. It stops feeling random and begins to follow a pattern that appears in similar situations. You start to notice when your dog chooses not to respond and what happens just before that moment. That awareness changes how you interpret the behavior and shifts your focus toward consistency. Your dog is not reacting only to what is happening in the present moment. They are also responding to what they expect based on previous interactions. That expectation is built slowly through repetition rather than sudden change. And once it becomes stable, it begins to guide how your dog behaves in similar situations. When your dog experiences consistent responses, their behavior becomes more direct and confident. They approach, engage, and respond without hesitation because the outcome feels predictable. But when that consistency becomes less clear, hesitation begins to appear more often. That hesitation is not random, and it reflects a shift in how your dog is interpreting you. This is where small moments start to carry more meaning than larger ones. A delayed response, a lack of eye contact, or a slight pause becomes part of a bigger pattern. Those patterns build slowly and often go unnoticed until they repeat frequently. And when they repeat, they become part of how your dog interacts with you daily. Most people look for obvious signs when trying to understand behavior. But dogs communicate through consistency rather than intensity, and that is where meaning develops. What appears insignificant on its own becomes meaningful when it happens again and again. That repetition is what turns behavior into something predictable. Your dog is not ignoring you in a way that is emotional or intentional in a human sense. They are adjusting their response based on what feels reliable to them. That reliability comes from how your actions unfold over time. And when those actions feel less predictable, your dog adapts accordingly. This adaptation does not appear dramatic at first. It shows up as small changes in how your dog chooses to engage. They may respond slightly slower, hesitate briefly, or wait for more information before acting. Over time, these small changes become more noticeable because they repeat consistently. Repetition is what turns a behavior into a pattern. And once a pattern forms, it becomes easier for your dog to rely on it. That reliance shapes how they behave moving forward. It becomes part of their understanding rather than a temporary reaction. This is why behavior shifts rarely feel sudden when you look back at them. They develop gradually and become clear only after they repeat enough times. By the time they are obvious, the pattern is already established. And that is why early awareness is so important. Your dog is not simply reacting to commands or cues. They are responding to how they interpret the entire interaction. That includes your tone, your timing, and your consistency across situations. When those elements align, your dog responds more clearly. When those elements feel less aligned, your dog begins to adjust. That adjustment is not resistance, and it is not disobedience. It is a response to how predictable the situation feels from their perspective. And that perspective is shaped entirely by experience. Over time, your dog begins to rely more on what they expect than what they are told. That expectation becomes their reference point. And once it becomes stable, it influences how they respond in every interaction. This is where behavior becomes structured rather than reactive. Your dog is not deciding in the moment, but responding based on learned patterns. and those patterns guide their behavior consistently. Once you recognize this, the behavior becomes easier to understand. It stops feeling confusing and begins to feel predictable. And predictability is what allows you to see patterns clearly. Because your dog is not ignoring you without reason. They are responding to what they have learned about how interactions typically unfold. And that learning shapes how they behave in subtle but consistent ways.